everybody. Welcome to the Minimalist Podcast, where we discuss what it means to live a meaningful life with less. My name is Joshua Fields Milburn.
And I'm Ryan Nicodemus, and together, we're the Minimalists.
We are here on this special day. Malabama is here.
Hi, everybody.
And of course, the birthday boy, TK Coleman.
We wish you a Merry Christmas.
Happy birthday, TK. To celebrate on this free public minimal episode, we're bringing Dr. Jerry Tennant on the show to speak to a listener about chronic illness. If you or anyone you know is suffering from a chronic illness, then this episode is for you. Please share it widely with anyone who might be suffering. But please note, none of this is medical advice. We don't give advice on this podcast, and this episode is certainly no exception. We also have an outstanding lightning round for you, a live stream question, and a listener tip. Oh, you can check out the full 2-hour maximal edition of episode 368 with Dr. Jerry Tennant, where we answer 4 times the questions and we dive deep into several simple living segments. That private podcast episode is out right now at patreon.com/theminimalists. Your support keeps our podcast and YouTube channel 100% advertisement free because, say it with me, y'all, advertisements suck. Let's start with our callers. If you have a question or comment for our show, give us a call, 406-219-7839, or email a voice memo to podcast@theminimalists.com. Our first question today is from Rand.
This is Rand from Houston, Texas. I know that there are many causes of chronic illness, for example, losing the genetic lottery. However, there are many chronic lifestyle illnesses, diabetes, heart disease, and cancer. Do you think that there will ever be a time when medicine will focus on prevention instead of just treating the symptoms?
Joining us by phone to help answer this question is Dr. Jerry Tennant, MD. He wrote this book. I'll hold it up if you're watching the video version of the podcast. This book is called Healing is Voltage. And the reason I wanted to have Dr. Tennant on the podcast, I read this book when I was doing something called PEMF therapy. And this book was in the waiting room. And I immediately picked it up and started going through it. And I realized, oh, I know a lot, but there's so much I don't know about my own chronic illness that I've been dealing with the last 4 years. And this really helped put it in perspective for me. Dr. Tennant, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me.
You know, I want to address Rand's question head on, and then we'll dive a bit into your book as well. Now, we all know that a thimble of prevention is more effective than a truckload of treatment. And so the best way to deal with any sort of chronic illness is to prevent it before it happens. And I think you talk about that quite a bit in your book. But then also, when someone is suffering from some sort of chronic illness, whether it's an autoimmune disease or cancer or something else that is plaguing their life, well, their whole life tends to change. And what Rand is talking about here is a paradigm shift. And you talk about this paradigm shift in your book as well. I was hoping maybe you could talk to Rand about when do we make this shift? Because medicine is really great at treating acute illnesses. If I sprain my ankle or break my leg, great. I can go to the hospital. I can get a cast. It can really help me. But beyond that, we're at a loss for healing today. In fact, it seems that we are sicker than ever.
Yeah, so Rand, I appreciate your question and wish that we had the rest of the week to answer it because there are many misconceptions that have been taught to physicians and to the public for many years. And your question included several of those. And so I'm going to, try to keep my answer as short as possible, but still give you some information if I may.
Yes, please.
First of all, the idea that you got a shaft on the genetic lottery is primarily incorrect. So the idea that our genes are in control of everything actually was proven to be incorrect back in the 1950s. A chap got a Nobel Prize for showing that our genes that we get from our parents change. And they change not only according to our environment, but according to our diet. And so we do have the genes our parents gave us, but if you look at genes from twins, say, when they're born, and then you look at them again, say, when they're 20, they're the same when they're born, they're different when they're 20. So we're not stuck with the genetic programming that our parents passed on to us, with perhaps the exception of genetic emotions, which is a whole other subject unto itself, which I wish we had time to discuss. But let me move on. So it was shown some time ago then that our genes change, and that actually even our diet changes. So, for example, a group took mice that are called agouti, agouta, agouti mice, which are fat and yellow. And they gave them a diet that was filled with appropriate methylation. And now all their kids and all their grandkids and all their great-grandkids were small, normal, and brown. And so they changed the genetic presentation of all their offspring by just fixing the methylation defect that came along with the epigenetics and not necessarily the genetics itself. So that's one misconception. Another one, for example, was you mentioned cancer. So in the early 1900s, about 1910, if my memory serves me, a chap named Boveri suggested that cancer occurs when our genes mutate and cause cells to grow rapidly into tumors. And so the theory that's still being taught and still being used in treating malignancies is based on Boveri's suggestion, which was proven in 2013 to be incorrect. So for 100 years, we've been using the wrong theory to treat cancer. So what Thomas Seyfried in Boston at Boston University did, was to take a cell that was malignant and its nucleus had mutated genes. He removed that nucleus with its mutated genes and inserted a normal nucleus, assuming the cell would now become normal. It did not. It stayed malignant. He then did the opposite. He took a normal cell, removed its nucleus, and put in a nucleus that had mutated genes, assuming the cell would become malignant. It did not. It stayed normal.
Wow.
So after that was repeated at several other universities, it became obvious that mutated genes aren't what's driving the bus. And though they're simply a secondary phenomenon. And so when you realize that that our therapies, for example, it's been shown by the Australians that people who do chemotherapy, 2.3% of them live longer than those who don't in the U.S. and 2.1% in Australia. So basically 98% of people who do chemotherapy, it's ineffective.
I noticed some staggering stats in your book about cancer treatments in general, and that was certainly one of them.
So the issue, again, it's not genetically driven. Now, I could spend, obviously, if I had another 10 or 15 minutes to talk to you just about cancer, I could tell you what I think is the cause and how it works, but then that would take up our whole time. So, but basically, what I want you to take away, hopefully, from what I'm telling you is to spend a little more time doing research and do not believe that you're stuck with the results of the genetic lottery, that you can change your genetic function by changing not only your diet, but changing your vision of the environment in which you live. And that all chronic disease starts and ends with whether or not cells lose their voltage, which causes them to lose oxygen, and then everything is downhill from there. So hopefully we'll have time to discuss that a little bit later. So I hope that answer is helpful to you.
Jerry, I think that's a perfect way to segue into your book. We tend to do this segment on the podcast called More About Less, and we usually do it on the private podcast. We're going to pull it up here because I thought this was a perfect time to dive into your book. And so I've got some excerpts here. I treat this book almost like an encyclopedia in a way, and this will feel like a bit of a deep dive, but I assure you we are only scratching the surface. I couldn't go through even 10% of this book right now. But I wanted to start on page 24 because it really starts with your story, Jerry. And you were a surgeon, and in 1994, in the book, you talk about how you developed, through actually doing eye surgeries on people, you developed encephalitis, neuropathies, and a low platelet count and other nervous system defects in 1994. You said in the book, I could see a patient to diagnose what was wrong with them, but I couldn't remember how to write a prescription. I also developed spastic movements that prevented me from safely performing eye surgery. I had to quit work on November 30th, 1995. For almost 7 years, I slept about 16 hours per day. Remember that I had viruses in my brain and viruses in my spleen. And in your book, there is this really cute picture of you sleeping with, you have two dogs who are sort of sharing their electrons with you, which is really opening the door for, I think, maybe even the third chapter of the book, which is called Healing is Voltage. The book is called that, but also the third chapter there, you're talking about voltage. So what was the impetus here? Obviously, you had a tremendous problem with your own health, right? But that opened up the door for you to discover ways to heal.
Exactly. So I was doing the research for the laser made by the company called Visex that's used in LASIK surgery. I did about 90% of that research, and I had a lot of fun doing it, but we didn't know at the time that the laser wouldn't kill viruses. And so I was using it actually on a man from India who had scars on the superficial part of his cornea to carve those scars off. And so at the time, we didn't know that the laser wouldn't kill viruses. So it released the viruses from his leukemia that caused his corneal scarring. And those came up, went through my mask, through my nose, and into my brain. And I developed encephalitis. And so as you pointed out, it resulted in the fact that I could still figure out what was wrong with the patient, but I couldn't figure out how to treat them or remember how to do it. Plus, when I was doing cataract surgery, which I did a great deal of, all of a sudden I would develop a spastic movement and almost jump out of my chair, which doesn't work really well if you're operating inside somebody's eyeball. And so in order to be sure that I never harmed anybody, I realized I had to quit. And so I never did hurt anybody. It never did happen to me during a surgical procedure, but I'm sure it would have had I continued on.
Sure.
And so I went to the best doctors I could find, and I went to the head of corneal immunology at Harvard in Boston. I went to the head of the NIH Division of Infectious Disease. And they said, well, you got 3 viruses in your brain. We don't know what to do about it, so don't call us. We'll call you. And so I had 2 or 3 hours a day in which I could understand a newspaper or something similar, and then like a light switch would go off and I couldn't understand it anymore. So I realized I had a choice to make. I could use those 2 or 3 hours a day to try to figure out how to get myself well, or I could just lay down and die. And I chose the former. And so I began the process of trying to figure out how to get myself well. And so as I was sitting in my lazy chair, the thought came to me that if I could figure out how to make one cell work, I could make them all work. Because even though they look different, sort of like a desktop computer looks different from say an iPad, they're basically the same. They have all the same parts. They just look different and have different software. And so it is with the human cells. They look different and have different software. So I thought, well, if I can figure out how to make one of these work, I can make them all work. And so I started down that road. And so I bought a bunch of of cellular biology books, which I hadn't read in about 30 years. And as I was reading through each one of them, something jumped out at me. Each one of them had either a sentence or a page devoted to the fact that cells have to run at a pH of 7.35 to 7.45.
Mm.
Well, I didn't remember much about pH, so I started reading about that and discovered that pH is simply measurement of voltage in a liquid as compared to voltage in a wire. So if you've got a copper wire, you turn the switch on, electrons are moving. Turn the switch off, they stop. But in a liquid, the liquid can either be an electron donor or an electron stealer. And so you use what's called a pH meter, which is a fancy voltmeter designed for measuring voltage in a liquid, and it has a switch on it. So you put it in one position, and it will tell you the pH of the liquid. You switch it to the other direction, and it gives you the synonym, which is a measurement in millivolts. So I said, cells have to have voltage to work. Gosh, that makes sense. And so how do I measure it? And so that's how I got started down this path. I can continue the story if you like, but that was sort of the genesis of my realizing that I needed voltage. And as I was able to get the rudimentary equipment to measure it, I found my brain was running between 2 and 4 millivolts instead of the 25 millivolts where it's designed to work. And so that started my journey that I'm still on.
Let me ask you this. So in the book on page 91, you say, you will hear statements such as all disease occurs when you are acidic. What this really is saying is that all disease occurs when your voltage is low or an electronic stealer state. So can we talk about that real quick? What do you mean by when your voltage is low?
So physicians and other people working in health sciences are taught that there is such a thing as voltage in the body because we measure it with an electrocardiogram for the heart or an electroencephalogram for the brain. But for some reason, physiologists and physicians think that there's really not such a thing as voltage in all of our other cells, which doesn't make any sense, of course, because they all have voltage. And so the other thing that we're taught is that inside the cell, we have a molecule called ATP, which is the electron donor that makes the cell work. But that's just one of the 8 batteries that the body actually has. Our body has 8 different batteries, and a sophisticated electronic wiring system. So the human body is actually an electronic device. And like all other portable electronic devices, it has to have a battery system to work. And so we have these batteries. And interestingly enough, the largest batteries we have are our muscles. Now, our muscles are piezoelectric. So what does that funny word mean? So if you distort something and it emits electrons, that's called piezoelectricity. So, for example, if you take a piece of quartz and you squeeze it with a pair of pliers, it emits electrons. And that's basically, by the way, how quartz watches work. But our muscles are also rechargeable batteries. And so our muscles are stacked one on top of each other in a very specific order, like stacking batteries in a flashlight, to form a power pack. And so every organ in the body has its own muscle battery pack. And a stack of muscle batteries is what's been called an acupuncture meridian. And it's surrounded by this shiny stuff called fascia. So when you carve your Thanksgiving turkey, you'll see that around the muscles are this shiny sheath of things. And that is that bird's wiring system as it is yours. And that wiring system is actually in electronics, what's called a semiconductor, which means it moves electrons very, very rapidly, but only in one direction. So what we find then is that every organ gets its 25 millivolts to run from that acupuncture muscle battery pack. But to make new cells, when cells wear out or get injured, you have to have double that, 50 millivolts. And so what you find is that anytime you have a chronic disease, that battery pack has failed you, that acupuncture circuit muscle battery pack has failed you. And what do I mean by that? It's well known in battery technology that if you take a rechargeable battery and you drain it all the way to zero, it flips itself upside down polarity-wise. So if you think about a battery, it has a plus on one end and a minus on the other. If you drain it to zero, the plus and minus switch places. Now, if you put it in a battery charger upside down like that, it won't take a charge, will it? So all chronic disease of any consequence, you will find that the battery pack in that circuit has flipped its polarity upside down. It's basically, in my opinion, for example, you can't have any significant chronic disease unless you flip the polarity in its battery pack. Let me say that one more time because this is amazingly powerful. You cannot have any significant chronic disease unless you have flipped the polarity in that organ's battery pack.
What you say in the book is that all chronic disease is always defined by having low voltage. And I found this line really powerful. You said, you can take all the medications you like and do as much surgery as you like, but you will not heal unless you have negative 50 millivolts, raw materials, and a lack of toxins. And I think what's important to note here is it's not to say that all prescriptions or all medications are inherently bad or surgery is bad, but understanding that those things alone don't allow us to heal. In fact, they often will cover up the healing. The analogy you use in the book is if you have a wooden plank that is infested by termites, simply painting the wooden plank isn't going to fix the termite problem. And I think that's what we're talking about, Dr. Tennant, when we're talking about chronic illness, is fundamentally there is an issue with the voltage in our bodies. So where do we go knowing that? And in the book, we'll actually pivot here in a second to nutrition because I think that's a big part of it. But knowing that, well, where do we go? If someone's suffering with some debilitating chronic illness, whether it's an autoimmune disease or something else, what do we tell them other than, hey, you don't have enough voltage?
Well, I've spent the last 25 years trying to teach people how to measure it so they can know if their circuits are on or off, and then what to do about it and what caused it. And we've identified 5 different things that cause you to flip the polarity. Not enough thyroid hormone. So the thyroid hormone T3, not T4, but T3 controls the voltage of every cell membrane in the body and the total number of mitochondria in the body. So you got to be sure to get that right. If you put a scar across your wiring system, a scar or a tattoo, you've frayed the wire. And so even if the battery inside that stocking of wire is charged up, it can't go anyplace because you've got a screwed up wiring system. So you got to fix your scars. Next is dental infections. So when an embryo is forming, it forms the brain first, and then circuits go from the brain down into the rest of the body. And on their way into the body, they go through very specific teeth. So if you get a short or a corrosion around a tooth, by that I mean, let's say you have a dead tooth, like a root canal tooth, or you get infection in the bone around a tooth, it shorts the circuit out. And so dental infections are a very common reason that people get chronically ill. And then we have emotions. Emotions are stored in the body as magnetic fields. And if you put a magnetic field around a circuit, it blocks the flow of electrons, doesn't it? So our emotions do that. And we figured out, by the way, how to convert emotions into being just memories using physics and electronics. And then finally, we have toxins. And under toxins, of course, you have the usual suspects, pesticides and infections and all of the other toxins that are around us. So you have, when you have enough of any of those 5 things to add up to drain your battery to zero, it flips it. And when it flips it, now you're going to get sick. And nothing you can do will allow you to get well until you can flip that battery back up, its polarity back up with what's called scalar energy, which will do it. And then you recharge it with electromagnetic energy. And now once your battery's charged back up, the body gets busy and heals itself. Because the body never forgets how to heal. It just has to have the voltage and the nutrition and get rid of the toxins to do it.
Wow.
And that's what I teach.
Yeah, this is wow, this is so fascinating. I'm interested, Dr. Tennant, in, you made this discovery about yourself. So what things did you start to do to get on your road to healing?
Well, obviously the first step is you got to know where you're going. I've told my kids as they were growing up, you got to have a goal of where you're going with your life, or you'll never get there.
Mhm.
And even if you choose the wrong direction, you can always change, but have a goal. And so it is with this. You've got to know what you're dealing with. And so, as I mentioned earlier, I've discovered that there's only one road, one pathway to all chronic disease. And so no matter what you're dealing with, whether you've got arthritis, whether you've got heart that won't work, whether you've got breast cancer, whether you've got ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease, whether you've got scoliosis, whether you've got macular degeneration in your eyes, the list goes on and on. You got there with all of them the same exact way, and that is you flip the polarity in its power supply. And so when you do that, you lose the ability to deliver oxygen to that particular organ. Anytime, and all living things, plants and animals, contain fungal spores. And when the fungal, the reason we have fungus on the planet is to take dead or dying organic material and turn it to dirt. So, for example, when a leaf falls off a tree, there are fungal spores on it. And when that leaf no longer has voltage and oxygen, the fungal spores wake up, and it's their job to turn that leaf to dirt. Well, the same thing happens if you lose voltage and oxygen in your breast or your prostate or your liver or whatever. The fungal spores wake up and try to turn that organ to dirt because that's what their job is. And then there is the stimulus when you lose oxygen to have stem cells go nearby and invade nearby blood vessels and make a mass to bring in more oxygen. And so that's where we end up. So the point is that no matter what's wrong with you, it always goes down this same pathway. And anything else you do, short of pushing it back to where you have normal voltage and normal oxygen, is simply a Band-Aid and buys you some, perhaps not, you don't feel so bad while you're in the process of going down the tubes. But it's easy once you start understanding things and looking at the body through the eyes of physics instead of through the eyes of biochemistry. It's much easier to deal with all of these so-called untreatable illnesses. And I'm a perfect example of that. I was supposed to die at the end of the of the 1990s, and here I am 25 years later still trekking.
Yeah.
So, Jerry, in the book, you talk about quite a few things I won't have time to cover here. Things like why most people are iodine deficient, why it makes sense to get off antacids and drugs that stop the production of stomach acid, and why a lack of stomach acid might actually cause obesity. You talk about metabolic syndrome X and fibromyalgia and hypothyroidism. You talk about the dangers of statin drugs. You talk about why most people have been exposed to Lyme disease, but only some people have the symptoms of Lyme disease. And there's a whole lot more in the book. Bowling ball syndrome was something that was really fascinating to me that unfortunately won't have time to cover, but you can check that out in the book. I do want to spend some time real quick, though, on chapter 5. You talk about nutrition. And you say the key to making chronic disease better is making a single cell work. If you give the body the things a single cell needs to work, the body often has the power to heal all of the cells of the body. And that means you get well. And then later in the chapter, you say, to be healthy, you must stop eating anything that says partially hydrogenated or canola oil. So we can talk about the problems with seed oils here. You have to stop eating fried foods and cheese in restaurants because these almost always are made of partially hydrogenated seed oils. In addition, you must stop using all forms of artificial sweeteners such as aspartame, Splenda, xylitol, and other sweeteners that end in OL. In fact, I stopped chewing the regular gum that I used to chew every day, most of the day, after reading that paragraph. And you say all of these are severe neurotoxins that the body doesn't know how to get rid of. Stop MSG, as it is also a neurotoxin. Stop smoking. That should be obvious. Stop eating soy. And now, Jerry, we got to talk about this one. Stop drinking coffee. Are you saying I have to put down this coffee that's in front of me right now?
Oh.
No.
It's my one vice in life.
Well, if you stop and think about everything that you put into your body, is this an electron donor or an electron stealer? Then you will have some guidance. And if you look, for example, I've read a lot of the cancer literature, for example, and everything that I can find that's ever been reported that has made cancer better is an electron donor. Everything that I can find that people report, well, this causes cancer, is an electron stealer. And so once you start thinking in terms of electron donor and electron stealer, your life becomes much simpler. And as you might guess, people come to me all the time and, hey, Dr. Tennant, will you recommend this product, or will you do this or whatever? And I look at it and I see, what's the balance of electron donors and electron stealers in it. And then I can have a better idea. And so, coffee has its own set of problems. It is an electron stealer, and it blocks the absorption of all the good minerals.
Like zinc and what else?
Well, yeah, just basically all your good minerals get blocked. The absorption gets blocked, and it's also an electron stealer. Now, if you're doing other things, you're monitoring the polarity of your acupuncture circuits, which I try to teach my patients how to do, and it's online, and it's an easy thing to do. It's like a pilot goes around his airplane and checks to be sure that the gas tanks are full and that all the hinges work and so forth. You can do the same thing every day. You brush your teeth and then you check your polarities and make sure that all of your switches are on, and then you go off to work. If you find a switch off, fix it. So if you find then that you just love coffee, but your switches are staying on and you're doing all of the other good things, most of what you're putting in your body is an electron donor, okay, have your coffee.
Ryan, what time is it?
You know what time it is. It's time for the lightning round, where we answer your questions from social media.
Yes, indeed. You can follow The Minimalists on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at The Minimalists. During the lightning round, we each have 60 seconds to answer questions with a short, shareable, less than 140-character response. We put the text to these minimal maxims in the show notes over at theminimalists.com/podcast, so you can copy and share our pithy answers on social media if you'd like. You can find all of our minimal maxims over there in the show notes. We have a question from Nadine on Facebook.
How can minimalism be used as a tool to assist the prevention and management of chronic illness?
Okay, so today on the private podcast, we spoke with Dr. Jerry Tennant about chronic illness. We dove into his book, some of that on the public version as well. Go ahead and throw 60 seconds on the clock for me, because I want to unpack this with something pithy. If addition is the cause, subtraction is the cure. Too often what we're trying to do to prevent or cure chronic illness, or to prevent or cure chronic stuffitis, the material possessions in our homes, is add more. You know what will solve my problem with stuff? If I just go to the Container Store and get a bunch of bins, or I buy things to fix my problem with things. And then we do the same thing with our medical problems as well. If I were to just get more medication or more treatment or more doctor's visits, more is actually the cause of the dis-ease. So subtraction is the real cure.
I love it. All right, Professor Sean, give me 60 seconds. My pithy answer is this: more consumption, more problems. Or you could say mo consumption, mo problems. But here's the thing, is that when we consume more, we're bringing more things into our life, whether it's physical clutter or whether it's bad food, whatever it is. If we're consuming more food, we're consuming more physical items. If we're consuming more entertainment, we are going to have more problems. We have to be able to set up these boundaries so we can avoid things like, chronic illness and prevent things like that. But also you're preventing a cluttered mind, you're preventing a cluttered home. So yeah, I mean, it sounds so simple, and it is simple, but we all know simple ain't easy.
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, TK Coleman's got 60 seconds. Enlighten us.
Minimalism maximizes the value of everything. Dr. John Deloney uses the metaphor of walking around with a backpack full of bricks to capture the idea of the things that weigh us down. If you're walking around with a backpack full of bricks, no matter what you do, go for a walk, go for a bike ride, go for a hike, sit down to have dinner, you are going to be unnecessarily weighed down. You're going to be heavier. But when you start taking bricks out of that backpack, you are lighter. You are freer. And no matter what you do, you bring that lightness and that freedom to the activity. We can't tell you how to be you. That knowledge comes from within. What we can help you with is the art of letting go of the things that unnecessarily hold you back from being who you already know to be. Minimalism can make every aspect of your life better because it's about letting go of those things that keep you from being the best version of yourself you already know how to be.
Yes! Nice.
I mean, technically he was half a second over, but
Semantics.
We'll clean it up in post.
yeah.
We're going to check in with our Patreon live stream here in a moment. But first, real quick for right here, right now, little segment we do where we talk about one thing that's going on in the life of the minimalist. It's TK's favorite time of year. Not only is today, the day we're recording this, his birthday, but it is Christmas time.
It's the most wonderful time of the year. Hey, y'all, I wrote an anti-horror story on Facebook.
What?
You got to let me read this.
Okay.
Maybe we don't have time today, and maybe we'll come back next week. But I got a little anti-horror story that I wrote for all of the people who are like, you can't play that Christmas music until after Thanksgiving. I think you all will like it. I think you'll enjoy it.
All right. I'm looking forward to that. Speaking of Christmas, TK, we have, as you know, the Minimalist Rulebook, 16 Rules for Living with Less, which you can download for free over at theminimalists.com. And in there, 2 of those 16 rules are about gift giving. We have a gift giving rule. We call it the minimalist gift giving rule. I won't spoil it. You'll have to download the free ebook in order to read that. But then we also have the minimalist gift getting rule.
Oh.
And as minimalists, we still accept gifts. And we talk about both of those rules in the Minimalist Rulebook. If you're looking for other Christmas-related materials on minimalism, check out our YouTube channel. If you just go to youtube.com/theminimalists and you type in Christmas there on the little search bar, there are quite a few Christmas videos we have on there. So Ryan and I did 3 seasons of this show called Living Room Conversations. And one of those was season 2, episode 17. What's Christmas morning like in a minimalist home? Little episode that he and I did together. There's another episode over there called Can We Talk About All These Stupid Christmas Gifts? And then another one, a question that we had was, how do you get people to stop buying you gifts? You'll find a whole lot more of that. A bunch of free materials over there about Christmas. If you go to youtube.com/theminimalists and just type in Christmas in the search bar. Let's tune in to our Patreon live stream. Alabama, you got a question for us?
I sure do. We have a question here from Lisa. She wants to know if there are any insights into the evolutionary reasons as to why some individuals suffer from migraines.
You know, I started suffering from migraines just this year. And during our added value segment, which we're going to do on the private podcast this week, I have something that's helped out immensely with the headaches. I found that there are multiple factors in mine. I went to go see our chiropractor, Jamie Montalban, and Dr. Fantasia. Did you know Fantasia's going out on his own now?
No way.
They're breaking up the duo.
Man, dude, they make the best team.
They really do.
Yeah.
Anyway, they had me get this particular neck pillow that I lay on like 3 times a day for 2 minutes a day, and it's helped the migraine significantly. On a previous episode, I talked about the CO2, and maybe if you're breathing too much CO2, that can lead to headaches as well.
Mm-hmm.
Also, overdoing it on any vitamins or supplements can cause headaches.
Oh.
Sinuses are another reason that we tend to get migraines if we have some sort of sinus congestion. And then in this book, Healing is Voltage, there's the whole chapter about bowling ball syndrome, which causes migraines. And so you'll have to check that out. One thing that the chiropractors really helped me out with is mine tends to be this muscle right here when it gets real tight. If I'm sleeping on it funny, if I lay on it funny, this muscle here causes migraines. I feel him when he like adjusts right here. I can feel it up here in my head.
Oh, wow.
So those are all multiple factors. Migraines are just telling us it's a sign. It's the pain that points us toward the healing, as we talked about earlier on the private podcast.
Yeah.
That pain is pointing you toward a direction to go so that you can heal. All right, before we get to our listener tips today, coming up on the private podcast this week, we have a private minimalist home tour. We have our impulse purchases segment. We, of course, have TK's tweet of the week. We have an outstanding added value segment for you and much more of less. In the meantime, Alabama, what do you got for us?
Here's a minimalist insight from one of our listeners.
This is Rochelle from Saginaw, Michigan. I just finished the Subtract episode, and I have a suggestion for Kelly and anyone who's trying to listen more. I have adopted a practice of adjusting my posture when I realize that I'm in a situation where I need to listen. For example, if I'm seated, I stack my hands in my lap with my palms up, and this reminds myself that I am here to receive what the other person has to say. I hope this tip helps Kelly and anyone else trying to listen more. Thanks.
All right, y'all, that's our minimal episode for today. Big thanks to Dr. Jerry Tennant for joining us. His book is called Healing is Voltage. We'll put a link to this in the show notes. By the way, TK, we got a bunch more surprise questions on the private podcast this week, like, what can I do to improve my self-care routine? How do you let go of addiction? What is the minimalist new junk drawer challenge? And how can you use it to minimize all that clutter in your junk drawer today? Y'all are going to love that one. Plus a million more questions for the Minimalist and Dr. Tennant. And if you want to hear all that, check out the Minimalist private podcast at patreon.com/theminimalists or click the link in the description. And if you leave here today with just one message, let it be this: love people and use things, because the opposite never works. Thanks for listening, y'all.
We'll see you next time.
Peace.
Every little thing you think that you need, every little thing you think that you need, every little thing that's just feeding your greed. Oh, I bet that you'd be fine without it.